Before sunrise, the rooftop garden above Marrow and Thyme belonged to wind, herbs, and the hum of refrigeration units. The restaurant sat on the top floor of a renovated brick warehouse in the warehouse district, the kind of place that looked industrial from the street and expensive from the menu. By day, delivery trucks backed into the alley below, line cooks smoked by the service stair, and reservation hosts spoke in low-polished voices near the front glass. But above all of that, on the roof was a different world entirely. The owners had built a kitchen garden there years earlier as part practicality, part image, and part obsession. Raised cedar beds ran in straight rows under string lights. There were climbing frames for beans in summer, deep boxes of rosemary and thyme, tubs of mint, tomatoes in warm months, and winter greens under low clear covers when the cold rolled in. A narrow gravel path cut between the beds. Along the south edge sat compost bins, rain barrels, and a little locked tool shed painted dark green to disappear against the parapet wall. At that hour, before the prep cooks arrived and before the city heat had a chance to rise through the tar and brick, the garden felt almost suspended above the rest of the world. The skyline was still blue-black. Steam drifted from vents on nearby rooftops. Traffic below had not yet committed to becoming a roar. Wind moved over the roof in low and even breaths, carrying the smells of wet soil, basil, old rain, and the faint metallic edge of the building's HVAC system. Nico Alvarez liked the roof best at that hour. At 36, he was the executive chef in title and a glorified firefighter in practice, spending most days putting out disasters made of timing, staffing, deliveries, and human ego. The rooftop garden was one of the only parts of the restaurant that ever felt honest to him. Plants grew or died, soil needed turning. Herbs bolted if neglected. There was relief in that kind of plain consequence. So most mornings before the kitchen really woke, Nico took his coffee upstairs, checked the beds, clipped what he needed for service, and got 10 or 15 minutes of silence before the rest of the day came for him. That morning, silence ended at the rooftop gate. The bobcat was sitting on top of it. For a second, Nico's brain refused the shape entirely. The rooftop access gate was a black metal frame set into the waist-high garden fence, separating the main roof mechanical area from the planted beds. Cats did not sit up there. Neither did raccoons. The outline was too clean, too deliberate. Tufted ears, short tail curled close, long legs folded beneath a spotted tawny body, balanced like a carved thing against the paling skyline. Nico stopped halfway up the last service stair and just stared. The bobcat stared back once. Then it looked down into the garden, not at him, not at the stairwell. Into the garden itself, toward the far beds nearest the south parapet wall. It didn't run. That was what made his stomach tighten. He had lived in the city long enough to know wildlife was not as far away as people liked pretending. Coyotes turned up in parking garages. Hawks nested on office towers. Raccoons ruled alleyways with more confidence than any elected official. A bobcat on a rooftop, though, should have been impossible enough to send him back downstairs for a camera and witnesses. Instead, he found himself stepping more quietly onto the roof. "Well," he said under his breath, because speaking normally felt absurd, "you are not on the reservation list." The bobcat stayed where it was. It was young, he saw now. Not a huge adult, but not a kitten either. Lean, bright-eyed. Its coat was damp in patches, as though it had come through wet shrubs or an irrigation channel somewhere below before finding its way up the building maze. One forepaw looked dark with dirt. Its whole body held a wired stillness that was not relaxed and not exactly panic either. Focus, tension, attention. Nico took another step. The bobcat rose, sprang lightly down from the gate to the gravel path, trotted 6 feet deeper into the garden, and stopped beside the third raised bed from the wall. Then it looked back at him. A pulse of unease moved through him. It had not fled the roof. It had repositioned toward something. He set his coffee on the parapet ledge and pulled his phone from his pocket, half intending to call building security and half intending to prove to himself that this was really happening. Before he could decide, the rooftop door banged open behind him, and pastry chef May Sullivan stepped out carrying 2 flats of herbs and the permanently skeptical expression of someone who had worked too many mornings to be impressed by anything before 7. She saw Nico first, then followed his stare, then stopped dead. "Nope," she said. "Absolutely not. What is that doing up here?" "Being extremely uncooperative with reality," Nico replied. May put the herb flats down very slowly. "Is that a bobcat?" "Yes." "On the roof?" "Yes. And you're standing closer to it than I'm comfortable with." "It hasn't moved off." May looked from the animal to the bed it stood beside. "It's not trapped." "No." "It's not cornered." "No." "So why is it still here?" That was the right question. The raised bed nearest the bobcat was one of the larger winter boxes, planted with kale, parsley, and early brassicas under a low temporary hoop frame that had been removed the week before. The soil surface looked dark and recently turned in one section near the back edge. But Nico had workers in and out of the garden often enough that disturbed soil didn't mean much by itself. Then the bobcat did something stranger. It lowered its head toward the bed, listened, and took one slow step along the cedar edge. Then another. Then it stopped and lifted one paw as if testing whether to touch the soil. May saw it too. "It's watching the dirt." Nico inhaled, about to answer, when the sound came. Beep, very faint. Both of them froze. The city was full of beeps, delivery trucks, service lifts, security panels, elevator reverses, kitchen timers. But this one did not belong to the roof around them. It came from inside the garden bed itself. Short, electronic, muffled by dirt. May looked at Nico. "Did you hear that?" He nodded slowly. The bobcat's ears snapped forward. It took 2 quick steps along the bed, then looked back at them with a sharp, hard stillness that felt irrationally like insistence. Beep. Again, from under the soil. Every nerve in Nico's body lit up at once. He backed up 1 pace automatically. May did the same. "What the hell is in that bed?" she whispered. Nico's mind raced through absurd options before landing on the one that made his skin go cold. Not irrigation. Not a buried sensor. Those didn't beep like that. Not a kitchen timer someone had dropped, because no one buried timers under kale. The sound was too regular, too electronic, too wrong. He looked at the disturbed patch near the back of the planter again, freshly turned. Not the whole bed, just a section about the size of a toolbox lid. May's face changed as the same conclusion reached her at roughly the same speed. "Nico." "Yeah, that sounds like a device." He did not answer, because if he said yes aloud, the world would have to become the kind in which a wild bobcat was standing beside a rooftop garden bed and a buried electronic object was beeping under the soil. The bobcat barked once, a short, rough, urgent sound. Then it jumped backward off the gravel path and onto the metal gate again, as though even it had reached the limit of how close it wanted to stay. Nico moved faster than he knew he could. He shoved May toward the stairwell door. "Down, now." She didn't argue. That frightened him more than if she had. By the time they hit the service landing, he was already on the phone with 911, forcing his voice into clean, stripped-down facts while adrenaline tried to make it shake. Possible suspicious device. Rooftop garden. Active electronic beep. Freshly disturbed soil. Keep everyone out of the upper floors. Yes, the building is occupied. Yes, restaurant staff. Yes, we are evacuating. The dispatcher's voice sharpened instantly. Within 90 seconds, the restaurant had transformed from sleepy pre-service prep into controlled panic. Nico pulled the fire alarm. The building manager came sprinting from the office mezzanine, furious until he heard the word device, and then not furious at all. Prep cooks spilled into the alley in aprons and clogs. Dishwashers stood confused in the loading bay. The breakfast baker came out carrying a bowl of risen dough, because she apparently needed one thing in her hands to remain functional. Guests, blessedly, had not yet started arriving. And still, through all of it, when Nico risked one glance upward from the alley, he could see the bobcat silhouetted on the rooftop gate. Still there, still watching the garden bed. Police arrived first, then fire, then the bomb squad, because no one in city dispatch laughed when a chef described beeping from a freshly turned planter on a commercial rooftop. The alley became a wall of emergency lights washing red-blue across old brick. Streets were blocked. Adjacent businesses were told to hold inside or clear out, depending on their proximity. The roof was isolated. No one went back up, except in a remote camera feed the building engineer managed to pull from the HVAC service unit. The Bobcat remained visible the entire time. Officer Lena Carver from the bomb squad watched the rooftop feed twice before she said anything. She was in her 40s, calm in that unsettling way specialists often are when everyone else has already given panic their share. She leaned closer to the monitor where the rooftop showed in grainy angle and pale dawn light. Raised beds, gravel path, parapet wall, and one small wild cat perched on the garden gate like a sentinel. "It hasn't moved?" she asked. Nico, now standing in the command perimeter in chef whites with cold coffee drying on one sleeve and no memory of the last 15 minutes in proper order, shook his head. "Not really. It went to that bed first, then backed away when the beeping started." Lena gave a slight nod and turned back to the screen. The bomb robot went up through the service elevator because the roof stairwell was too exposed for people until they knew more. Its camera rolled through the planters, pivoted toward the disturbed section of soil, and zoomed in. Fresh handwork, all right. Darker, looser dirt, not professionally turned. Shallow scrape marks on the cedar edge. The Bobcat had finally shifted off the gate and now sat farther back near the herb drying rack, still with line of sight on the same bed. The robot extended a probe arm and gently brushed away the top layer of soil. Black plastic appeared, then wiring, then the small rectangular face of a timing unit half-packed in damp earth. The alley below went dead silent. Even Nico, who had already believed it in principle, felt his body reject the sight in practice. Lena's voice became even more level. "Confirmed suspicious device." No one around her moved unnecessarily. The robot exposed more. Homemade container, battery pack, improvised trigger arrangement with a digital timer and a low-charge warning tone that must have been the beeping Nico and May heard. Buried beneath a layer of soil and herbs as if whoever planted it thought fresh parsley would make the whole thing invisible. The rooftop garden, all those weeks of work and water and careful pruning, suddenly looked like the set dressing for someone else's intention to hurt people. Nico thought of the lunch service that would have started in 5 hours. The private event booked upstairs that evening. The servers who cut through the roof to pull mint and basil every day. May, who would have been up there alone 20 minutes later if he hadn't arrived when he did. He leaned one hand against the alley wall until the moment passed. The device was too unstable looking to risk a conventional move, so the squad prepared a disruption shot right there on the roof. Nearby windows were cleared. Adjacent rooftops were checked. The neighboring office block was partially evacuated. The whole district seemed to pull itself inward around the waiting. And through the entire operation, the Bobcat still did not fully leave the roof. At one point, as technicians finalized the shot alignment, it moved to the parapet corner nearest the bed and sat down again. Its body language no longer frantic exactly, but fixed with the same stubborn attention that had first pulled Nico's eye upstairs. "Why is it still there?" May whispered from behind the police tape. No one answered. Maybe it smelled the electronics. Maybe the device emitted a sound only the animal noticed hours earlier when it crossed the roofline. Maybe it had paste encircled and stayed because the soil hid something deeply wrong and it could not stop checking it. Whatever the cause, its fixation had intersected one human being's early routine at exactly the right minute. That was enough. The disruptor fired with a hard, flat concussion that echoed off the warehouse walls and sent a flock of pigeons exploding from the next building over. A half-second later came a crack from the roof and then nothing. No fireball, no blast wave, just the sharp, ugly quiet of a threat interrupted before it could choose its own timing. The robot camera went back in. The device had been torn open. Timer disabled. Wiring severed. Rendered safe enough for the next stage. Only then did the Bobcat finally move. Nico saw it on the monitor first. It stood from the parapet corner, looked once toward the bed, then toward the roof access bulkhead where the robot and technicians had come up. For one suspended second, it held still in the brightening morning light, every line of it clean and alert against the sky. Then it bounded onto the neighboring ventilation housing, crossed the narrow gap to the next lower roof with impossible ease, and vanished behind a row of HVAC units before anyone could even point. It was just gone. May let out a breath like she'd been holding it for an hour. The rest of the day unraveled in layers of police interviews, Bomb squad reports, news vans, shaken staff, canceled reservations, and one furious ownership group trying to understand how a device ended up buried in a rooftop garden above their restaurant. Security footage and later investigation narrowed the answer quickly enough. A recently fired former maintenance subcontractor with a grudge and access knowledge had entered through an unsecured roof service corridor the night before and hidden the device under cover of darkness, apparently planning for it to remain undiscovered until service hours. Arrests followed by the weekend. The news loved the rooftop bobcat more than the police did. By noon, every local station had some variation of the story. Wild cat's strange behavior leads to suspicious device discovery. Rooftop bobcat helps prevent disaster. Urban predator stuns restaurant staff. Nico hated most of the headlines on site. He thought they were sentimental, stupid, and guaranteed to make every sane detail harder to preserve. But he couldn't deny the central fact. He went upstairs early. The bobcat was already there. The beeping was under the soil. Everything after that was just human beings scrambling to catch up. That evening, after statements were done and the building was finally released back to its owners, Nico went up to the roof once more with Lena Carver and the building manager. The garden looked wounded, one bed torn open, soil scattered, herb labels knocked sideways by the robot's track. The roof no longer felt peaceful. It felt interrupted, violated, held open by what almost happened. Lena crouched beside the damaged bed and examined the cedar rim where the robot had first brushed the dirt away. "There," she said. Nico followed her finger. On the soft edge of the soil and along one section of the cedar frame were fresh paw marks, small feline prints, repeated. One after another, concentrated exactly where the timer had been buried. May, who had insisted on coming back up despite everything, stood very still beside them. It kept checking the spot. Nico looked toward the gate where the bobcat had first perched against the skyline. The roof beyond was empty now, just ductwork and morning sky turning toward late afternoon. "It wouldn't leave it alone," he said. Lena stood and brushed dirt from her gloves. "Good thing." For the next week, the restaurant stayed closed. Staff cleaned, investigators revisited, contractors secured access routes, and the rooftop garden beds were all turned over and checked because no one trusted appearances anymore. The city talked about vigilance. The owners talked about gratitude. Social media talked about destiny and guardian animals and everything else people say when a true story is already strange enough to feel fictional. Nico talked to his staff. That mattered more to him. He stood in the empty dining room 2 days later with every cook, server, porter, and manager gathered in a half circle and told them the plainest version he knew how to tell. "There was a device on the roof," he said. "We found it because something up there refused to let it be ignored." He did not call the bobcat a hero. He did not call it a sign. He just let the sentence sit there. People cried anyway. A week after reopening, before service, Nico took his coffee upstairs again. The roof was quiet. Wind moved the rosemary. New soil had been packed into the repaired bed. The city below sounded ordinary in the distance, which felt like its own miracle. He walked the gravel path slowly and stopped at the gate. There, in the damp on the cedar edge of the replanted bed, were 2 faint paw prints. Maybe old, maybe not. Maybe from a neighborhood cat. Maybe from nothing worth naming. Still, he stood there for a long moment, looking at them. Then he set his cup down, checked the soil himself, and only after that began clipping basil for lunch service.